Today we're doing something a little bit different, an army showcase of my Imperial Knights, and the story of how the collection got put together. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics for a video that I've been promising for a little while now. A couple of months back the channel hit the very cool milestone of no less than 100,000 subs, something that if you'd told me around a couple of years ago, I would have found it utterly inconceivable. If this video comes out when it was planned to, it should be 2 years to the day since I made my first very faltering video. I believe it was one about the Imperial Guard and talking about the Loyal 32 formation back in 8th edition. It's been a pretty crazy road to 100k. First we started out with mainly Space Marine unit reviews, then moved on to talking about Knights, Guard and Blood Angels, and on to a fair bit more general discussion about Warhammer 40k and covering news and model releases. Quite a bit of the growth came from the 9th edition release cycle, when it was quite fun turning into basically a rolling news platform for a little while, as Games Workshop kept on teasing us with new bits of rules day after day. I probably don't say it enough, but a massive thank you to everyone who's watching, liking and subscribing. You guys are an awesome community, really encouraging me to keep as many good videos coming as I possibly can, and helpfully teaching me all the things I miss in each video so I can improve for next time. In general, one of my main philosophies behind the channel is to focus on the content, releases, rules and miniatures, and try and be at least fairly unbiased when discussing options, and try and keep most of my own personal anecdotes and experiences out of it. It's one of the reasons why you don't see my face, and to try and keep random divergences to a minimum. I usually try and keep the video as focused as possible on the subject in hand. I guess I've just always felt that you guys are really here to see the content, not really to see the quirky adventures of a YouTuber with a big personality. That's maybe why it's taken me so long to get round to actually showing off my own armies, though it has often been a quite requested topic. In any case, we'll take a look at some of my Imperial Knights today, and I'm sure we'll be continuing to explore Warhammer 40k in plenty of other focus videos in the future. So I guess I'll hopefully see you for another one like this, when we hopefully reach 200k in another year or two. In any case, self-indulgent prattle aside, let's move on to the Knights of House Infernus. So here we have the current extent of my Imperial Knight collection for Warhammer 40k, the mysterious household of House Infernus, and perhaps some of the single models in 40k that I've put the most creativity and effort into painting. Imperial Knight armies really do feel like a blank canvas. There's so much awesome space on the carapace for freehand work or all manner of customizations, and I must admit I am pretty pleased with how they look ranked up. The army was a creation of 8th edition 40k, back when the Imperial Knights Codex came out, and I felt it turned them from an army that was at least relatively bland and flavourless into having really quite a lot more nuance, with multiple interesting and powerful ways to run them, both as a pure army and as allies. I think it's really hard not to like the idea of painting up what are effectively mini titans in 40k too. Huge cool plastic kits of this size just didn't really exist when I was first collecting the hobby back around 4th edition. I just never really saw myself ever owning any super heavy models. The little collection originally started life as an allied force alongside my Imperial Guards, which is why they're also painted white, and I decided to go with a similar sort of colour palette to make them fit in on the tabletop together, but go with different iconography and a heavy emphasis on the freehand. I'll link the showcase that I already made for them down in the description. In any case, I named the household House Infernus. That was before Chaos Knights with the Infernal Devotion were even a thing, and it certainly has led to some people questioning their loyalty to the Imperium. Their questionable devotion really isn't unfounded though. House Infernus operates from a lifeless barren moon on the outskirts of the Orwell system, though it was recorded in the distant past that they used to have regular contacts with the hive worlds of the system. Not a single communication has been responded to with the household's nobility for the last 3 millennia. The household sustains itself with regular pre-approved shipments based on Munitorum agreements with the hive worlds long ago. A tithe of materials and state prisoners are loaded into great transports by automated servitors, and the ships leave for the barren moon of Infernus, never to be heard from again. House Infernus never responds directly for requests for aid, though will quite often show up unbidden to conflicts within the system, laying waste to the foes of the Imperium with thermal cannon and Reaper chainsword. It is not truly known if they take to the field to defend the Emperor and the Imperium, or merely to safeguard their own supply lines. Many planetary governors have resented the parasitic nature of House Infernus, but only one such general has been foolish enough to deny them their tithe and break from the prescribed Munitorum protocol. Within days, the household had landed planetside, lain waste to 3 planetary regiments, and left most of the capital in ruins. It was only once General Polachenko was dead, and their materials had been granted them, that the blood-soaked Knights of House Infernus once more departed in silence. House Infernus might long have been declared renegade, if it weren't for fear of the consequences of what such a declaration might provoke. In any case, my headcanon aside, I decided to represent the shadowy nobles of House Infernus, each by a mythological beast of some kind, with similar but different flamey type styles on each banner and armour plate. They'd all have the same white armour, grey trim, and be tied together by a flame motif. The Phoenix was the first knight that I put together, and possibly the biggest and most effort bit of freehand I've ever done for Warhammer 40k. Generally when I'm trying to look for something really fancy, I tend to Google a whole load of logos and images online, then choose some aspects of each one that I like, then plan out the design in rough, maybe trying to make sure that some key elements are right in the most symmetrical places, such as the points on the flames and things. Then I generally block in a little bit of colour. I think I added in a very simple bit of blending along these, and then went round the edges in some darker colours to make the whole design maybe appear a little bit more 3D. I often get questions about how the white is done on these models, and it's really incredibly simple to be honest. It's simply a white spray can, and if you live in the UK, it's Halford's White Matte Car Body Spray. It doesn't really cost any different to Games Workshop, and I think it gives a really nice finish and dries quickly. I just make sure that the whole model is really nicely coated in that, then just shade in the recesses in a fairly dark grey. I quite enjoyed making a bit of an interesting text effect on this one. I particularly like the idea of rising from the ashes for this knight, as I'd often be playing them in House Tyrannus, where they have that fairly crazy stratagem for 3 command points, when you can bring a knight back from the brink of death and have it stand up with D3 wounds remaining. It was a bit more reliable in 8th edition, where you could re-roll it if it failed, giving you a 3/4 chance. This guy was originally striding to war alongside Imperial Guard armies. When the Knight's Codex came out, you could originally get a very silly 3+ invul save, with Rotate Ion Shields and Ion Aegis, and then maybe combine it with something like the Endless Fury relic, which just does some crazy flat damage against everything. I'd say out of my 3 knights, this guy's still my favourite. They maybe don't see quite as much play as they used to in 9th edition, but I really quite enjoy bringing them out for more fun and fluffy games. It's always quite satisfying to bring some big stompy robots around, deleting things with extreme prejudice. The second knight that was added to the collection was the Dragon, fully embracing the full cheese of the competitive Castellan meta that to be honest kind of oppressed 8th edition choices for really quite a long time. The dragon freehand on the carapace is most certainly inspired by the Dragon Age dragon. I think I actually remember being inspired by this by a set of armour from Mass Effect called Blood Dragon armour, that as soon as I saw it I thought yes, I'm going to be stealing that for my knight. Castellans really were ludicrously silly back in 8th. They could get that 3+ invul from Ion Aegis and Rotate Ion Shields, and then if you ran them in House Raven, you could reroll all 1s with them. Maybe not Games Workshop's best thought through stratagem, where you could reroll 1s to hit, wound, and the number of shots and things. The way 8th edition detachments work as well, you could also farm up a whole ton of command points with Imperial Guard. So typically I'll be having this guy, the Crusader and the Gallant, alongside a couple of small battalions of Imperial Guard, and maybe a tank commander as well, running around for screening, light infantry duty, and objectives. Probably the single proudest moment this guy ever had was on the top table of a pretty small tournament, facing off against a fairly similar knights list. I mainly focused this guy's weapons on one of the lesser Imperial knights, but I thought I'll just fire the Volcano Cannon into the Knight Porphyrion just to make them rotate Ion Shields and protect it. It proceeded to roll the maximum shots for the Volcano Lance, all of which hit and wounded. Then my opponent went on to have the ridiculous bad luck to fail 4 out of the 5 3+ invul saves he had to make on that night. And then to add insult to injury, the damage rolls also went quite well as well, just doing just enough damage to kill the Knight Porphyrion in one single shot. Almost certainly single-handedly won me the game there, a game that I otherwise thought I was probably going to lose, having taken some pretty heavy casualties when they got turn 1. Out of the big knights, he's really the only one who's kind of unfinished. I kind of need some sort of dragon-themed iconography to put on that left shoulder pad. Maybe I'll get round to finishing him up at some point in the future. Here's just a small picture to show the magnetization that I do with the knights. One thing that I do recommend that's kind of an extra step is to magnetize the hip joints of your Imperial knights, as it just makes them so much easier for transporting purposes. They can fit in smaller boxes, and it also gives you some quite nice posability in game. Definitely use a pretty hefty magnet for that though. Otherwise, despite him being a Castellan with very few options, I did decide to magnetize literally everything, perhaps partly for posability, but overall I was kind of glad I did. It meant that when Games Workshop finally did get round to nerfing the Castellan, they came down on them really quite hard, and it meant that if you wanted to field a top tier Imperial Knights list, you'd more likely be looking at 3 Crusaders now. With the spare parts I had from my last Imperial Knight, plus a couple of cheeky magnetized smoke launchers to hide the magnets on the top, it meant that I could now effectively field another Crusader Knight if I wanted to. From the pictures I would have thought that the Dominance Knights actually have a fairly different profile to the standard Imperial Knights, but really if you put them side by side, they are pretty well exactly the same height. I've certainly never played anyone that's minded anyway. People often seem to like seeing just a different take on a Knight Crusader. It did give me the excuse to paint up a nice little tilt plate for him as well, which was no bad thing. Lastly, for the 3 big knights, we come to Cerberus, my brutal and ferocious knight gallant, who enjoys coming down on the enemy like a pile of bricks. I often did get people question me as to why I was still running knight gallants. Most people did tend to be running multiple crusaders, and it was kind of true that knight gallants did have the opportunity to be screened out and made redundant for a turn or so, chewing through chaff. Despite this though, it was a very rare game in 8th edition that I ever regretted taking him. Gallants were considerably cheaper than crusaders, and often with the way that you positioned your army, it could often make it so he was by far the easiest knight to shoot down first, so he usually tended to take the brunt of enemy aggression, coupled with one of the defensive relics, perhaps either Sanctuary or the Armour of Sainted Ion. If he had first turn and the opponent didn't have any screens, he would take the Landstrider trait and use the full tilt stratagem to go for an absolutely crazy long charge, often easily reaching into the opponent's deployment zone. Very few people consider just how far this guy can reach on average, particularly in combination with a command reroll if things do go wrong. He'd then usually happily delete at least one unit, maybe with the option to use either Death Grip or Thunderstomp or something if it made a difference, and then the opponent would spend a fair bit of their firepower taking him down next turn. This really was no bad thing whatsoever though, as he'd normally aimed to be pretty central in the opponent's army. When he did eventually go down, it was 2 command points to explode on a 4+, again which you could command reroll in 8th edition, giving you a pretty hefty chance of giving yourself an enormous explosion, 2d6-inch range, and d6 mortal wounds to every enemy unit affected. It was a pretty common occurrence for him to do more damage in death than he ever did in life, and maybe the single most memorable time was when he was charged by about 4 Smash Captains with Thunderhammers, alongside some pretty nasty Deathwatch kill teams with Storm Shields on all sides. He interrupted to squash one captain, I think failed to Death Grip another, got killed in return, and the mortal wound explosion took out 2 other captains and bit enormous chunks out of 3 really elite Deathwatch kill teams. Again, another big turning point that almost certainly carried the game. I'm certainly going to be looking forward to the new Imperial Knights codexes when they come out in 9th. It's going to be interesting to see what sort of new lease of life Games Workshop gives these guys. Finally, and the most recent addition to House Infernus, is my little Griffin Armiger Knight that I painted up alongside one of the painting contests on the channel a year or so ago. I had a couple of Armigers kicking around from remnants of a Forgebane box from Admech vs Necrons ages ago, and that seemed like a good excuse to put some paint on one, and give the big knights a little expendable friend to accompany them into battle. I quite enjoyed painting the little Griffin for this guy. Maybe it's a bit less intimidating when you're committing to freehand on a fairly small project, rather than one where you've got acres and acres of white carapace to try and make a dent in. It's not really seen play in any sort of competitive list so far, but again it's a fun little model to use if I'm playing a bit more of a casual game. So hope you've enjoyed a bit of a chat through another one of my armies. House Infernus has certainly been some of my most high effort models to get together, but thoroughly rewarding nonetheless. Perhaps one of my proudest hobby achievements was when these guys won Best Painted Army at a 30-man tournament. It was kind of unexpected really. There were certainly many other armies that were definitely a lot better painted than mine, but I think people do respond quite well to fun, creative freehand. For people who are thinking about trying out a bit of fancy painting themselves, I really wouldn't be too intimidated. I personally advise just using a pretty small brush, layering the paint quite thinly, and then just repeatedly editing it and fixing mistakes until what you've got looks acceptable. It definitely takes a bit more time, but it gives you models that you'll absolutely treasure as a result. Totally looking forward to what the future brings for these guys, and I'll certainly be crossing my fingers that Games Workshop does something to make Knights a bit more viable in 9th. These guys will be ready and waiting to go when that day comes. So thank you very much for listening, and as I mentioned before, an absolutely massive thank you for the 100k. Onwards and upwards, and looking forward to many more videos to come. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to check out the rest of the channel, and my other army showcases, my Garden Marines, which I'll link down in the video description. There's plenty of other things down there, including the link to the Patreon page, which is what has allowed me to keep on making videos quite this regularly for you guys. A big thank you to the people who've supported on that, and the Element Games affiliate link if you were looking at picking up some new models and you live in the UK. Again, that also helps support and keep Auspex Tactics going. In any case though, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.